The Grand Hall of the Galactic Union was larger than any building on Earth. Thousands of lights shined from the high ceiling like small stars. Leaders, soldiers, and diplomats from more than 50 alien races sat in long rows of silver seats. They had gathered to celebrate the end of another galactic war. The mood inside the hall was relaxed and proud. Every race wanted to speak about its victories and achievements. One by one, military commanders walked to the center stage. They proudly shared stories about battles they had won and enemies they had defeated. Some races talked about giant space fleets, while others spoke about powerful weapons that could destroy moons. Each speech was followed by loud applause from the crowd. It slowly became a competition of pride instead of a meeting of peace. Everyone wanted to prove that their race was the strongest in the galaxy. Near the back of the hall sat Commander Elias Ward, the only human military officer invited to the summit. He wore a simple dark uniform without decorations or medals on display. Unlike the other commanders, he remained silent and watched the room carefully. Many alien leaders looked at him with curiosity. Humans had joined the Galactic Union only 20 years earlier. To most species, humanity was still young and unimportant. Several warriors from the powerful Craven Empire noticed the human sitting quietly alone. The Cravens were large creatures with heavy armor-like skin and glowing yellow eyes. They were famous across the galaxy for their strength in battle. Their commander, General Vorthak, enjoyed showing his power whenever possible. He looked at the human officer and smiled in amusement. To him, the human looked weak and harmless. General Vorthak stood from his seat and walked toward the center of the hall. His heavy footsteps echoed through the room as everyone turned to look at him. He spoke proudly about his victories in the border wars and his personal kill count of over 12,000 enemies. The crowd reacted with admiration and respect. Even experienced commanders seemed impressed by the number. Vorthak enjoyed every second of the attention. After finishing his speech, the Craven general looked directly at Commander Ward. A grin slowly appeared across his face as he pointed one large hand toward the human officer. The room became quiet as everyone followed his gaze. Vorthak's voice echoed through the chamber as he asked a question that sounded more like a joke than a challenge. He wanted the audience to laugh with him. "Human," Vorthak said loudly. "Surely your people also count their victories. Tell us your kill count so we may compare it with real warriors." A few alien delegates laughed quietly. Others smiled and waited for the human to answer. Some expected the number to be small. Others believed the human would avoid answering completely. After all, humanity had spent most of its short galactic history as traders, engineers, and explorers. Very few races believed humans had much military experience at all. Commander Ward slowly stood from his seat. His face showed no anger and no embarrassment. He simply adjusted his uniform and looked around the room. His eyes moved across the many alien faces staring back at him. The hall became strangely silent. Even those who had laughed moments earlier were now waiting for his answer. For several seconds, the human said nothing at all. General Vorthak laughed again and crossed his arms. "What is the matter, human? Is the number too small to remember?" More laughter spread through the hall. A few diplomats looked uncomfortable, but nobody interrupted the moment. The silence around Commander Ward continued for a few more seconds. Then he finally raised his eyes toward the Craven general. His voice when he spoke was calm and steady. There was no anger inside it, only seriousness. "Which number would you like to hear?" the human asked. The smile on Vorthak's face slowly faded. Commander Ward continued speaking in the same calm voice. "The civilian count or the military count?" For the first time that evening, complete silence filled the grand hall. Several delegates looked at each other in confusion. Others wondered if they had heard the human correctly. Even General Vorthak stopped smiling completely. The question he had asked as a joke no longer felt funny. Something about the human's voice made the room feel colder. It was not pride that people heard in his words. It was memory. One of the diplomats finally spoke from across the room. "What do you mean by civilian count?" Commander Ward looked toward the stars visible through the glass ceiling above the chamber. "When humanity fought its wars," he said quietly, "the battlefield was not always far away from home." No one in the hall moved. No one laughed. And for the first time since the summit had begun, The galaxy wanted to hear a human tell the story of Earth. The silence inside the Grand Hall felt heavier than before. General Vorthak stared at Commander Ward, trying to understand what the human meant. Around the room, whispers began to spread among the delegates. Some believed the human was joking. Others thought he was trying to avoid the question. But when they looked at his face, they saw no sign of humor. Commander Ward stood quietly for a moment before speaking again. He looked around the hall at the many alien races sitting before him. Most species in this room were born into peace, he said calmly. Humanity was not. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that many in the room could feel. The laughter from earlier had completely disappeared. An elder diplomat from the Arcturian Alliance slowly stood up. "Are you saying humans fought wars against civilians?" he asked carefully. Ward nodded once before answering. Humans fought many wars on their own world long before they reached the stars. Several delegates exchanged nervous looks. For the first time, they realized they knew very little about Earth's history. General Vorthak crossed his arms and frowned. "Every race fights wars," he replied confidently. "That does not make humans special." Commander Ward looked toward the Craven general. "Perhaps," he answered, "but most races fight one great war in their history. Humanity fought thousands." The room became silent once again. The human officer slowly walked toward the center of the hall. Above him, a giant holographic projector came to life. A blue planet appeared in the air for everyone to see. It was Earth, shining quietly in the darkness of space. Many younger species had never seen humanity's homeworld before. Commander Ward raised his hand toward the image. "This world looks peaceful now," he said. "But for thousands of years it was a battlefield." Images began to appear around the planet. Ancient soldiers carrying swords marched across fields. Wooden ships fired cannons across oceans. Later came tanks, aircraft, and giant cities burning under dark skies. The delegates watched in complete silence as the images changed one after another. Every century seemed to bring another conflict. Every generation seemed to face another war. Some alien leaders looked shocked, while others looked uncomfortable. The idea of fighting their own kind again and again was difficult for them to understand. General Vorthak looked at the images with disbelief. "How did your species survive this?" he finally asked. Commander Ward looked toward the stars above the chamber. "Because humans learned something very early," he replied quietly. "If we wanted peace, we first had to survive war." The room remained silent as the hologram changed again. This time, the image showed a battlefield covered in smoke and fire. Thousands of soldiers stood together against an enemy that could not be seen clearly. Several delegates leaned forward in their seats. They could sense that this battle was different from the others. Commander Ward stared at the image for several seconds before speaking. "This," he said quietly, "was the day humanity learned that monsters do not always come from Earth." The lights inside the Grand Hall suddenly felt colder, and for the first time, the galaxy wanted to know who the humans had fought among the stars. The image above the Grand Hall slowly changed again. Earth disappeared, and in its place came a dark region of space filled with broken ships and burning stations. Commander Ward looked at the battlefield quietly for several seconds. The delegates watched carefully, waiting for an explanation. Even General Vorthak no longer looked confident. Something about the humans' silence made the room uneasy. "This was the beginning of the Shadow War," Commander Ward finally said. The name meant nothing to most races in the hall. They searched their memories but found no record of such a conflict. That alone surprised them. A war large enough to fill an entire star system should have been known across the galaxy, yet almost nobody had heard of it. "The enemy appeared without warning near the outer colonies," Ward continued. "They did not send messages or demands. They did not ask for territory or resources. The hologram showed dark ships moving through space like shadows. Entire stations vanished from the map one after another. The delegates watched in complete silence. An older diplomat stood from his seat. "Who were they?" he asked nervously. Commander Ward looked toward the image before answering. Humanity called them the Void Swarm. The name alone seemed to make the room colder. Their ships carried no symbols, and no language could be translated from their systems. They came only to destroy and move forward. The hologram zoomed closer to one destroyed colony world. Cities burned beneath black skies while emergency signals filled the air. Escape ships launched from the surface, only to disappear moments later. Several delegates looked away from the images. They had seen war before, but this felt different. This enemy showed no interest in victory or negotiation. General Vorthak slowly stepped closer to the hologram. "How many worlds did humanity lose?" he asked quietly. Commander Ward looked directly at him. 7 colonies in the first 6 months, he answered. A wave of shock moved through the room. Losing even one world was considered a tragedy among most races. Humanity had lost 7 and still continued fighting. The human officer remained calm as more images appeared. Human fleets stood against enemy ships that outnumbered them 3-1. Damaged cruisers continued firing even while burning from inside. Rescue ships stayed behind to protect civilians instead of escaping. Many delegates could not understand why the humans refused to retreat, because retreat meant extinction, Ward explained. If the swarm reached Earth, humanity would end. The room fell silent once again. Every species understood those words. There was no surrender against an enemy that wanted complete destruction. For the first time, many delegates began to understand the fear hidden inside the humans' memories. Then another image appeared above the hall. It showed one human battleship standing alone against hundreds of enemy vessels. General Vorthak stared at the image in disbelief. "That ship," he whispered. "How did it survive?" Commander Ward looked at the burning stars around the ship. "It didn't," he replied quietly, "but it completed its mission." And suddenly, everyone in the Grand Hall wanted to know what that mission had been. The image of the destroyed battleship remained above the Grand Hall. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The delegates stared at the burning wreck drifting through space. Commander Ward stood quietly beneath the hologram with his hands behind his back. His face showed no pride and no sadness. It was the expression of someone remembering an old wound. General Vorthak finally broke the silence. "What mission was worth losing an entire battleship?" he asked. Commander Ward looked toward the image above them. "The ship's mission was simple," he replied calmly. "Hold the line for 12 hours. Confused whispers spread through the room. 12 hours did not seem long enough to justify such a sacrifice. The hologram changed once more. Behind the human battleship appeared hundreds of transport ships filled with civilians. Families, children, and refugees escaped toward safer systems. The delegates slowly began to understand the situation. The battleship had not been protecting territory or resources. It had been protecting lives. The crew knew they would not survive, Commander Ward explained. But if they failed, over 2 million civilians would die. The room fell silent again. Even the proud Craven general lowered his eyes for a moment. Few soldiers in the galaxy willingly accepted certain death. Humanity, it seemed, had done so many times. General Vorthak looked back at the human officer. "Were you on that ship?" he asked quietly. Commander Ward nodded once. Several delegates stared at him in surprise. The human standing before them had survived a battle that destroyed an entire warship. Suddenly, his calm voice made much more sense. The hologram zoomed closer to the ship's bridge. Human officers continued giving orders while explosions shook the walls around them. Damaged weapons fired until they overheated and failed. When ammunition ran out, the crew redirected power from life support systems to the guns. Every minute they survived meant more civilians escaped. "After 11 hours and 48 minutes, Ward said quietly, "we were the only ship still fighting." The delegates listened without moving. Even breathing seemed loud inside the chamber. General Vorthak slowly unclenched his fists. The joke he had made earlier felt very far away now. The Craven general looked directly into the human's eyes. "And your kill count?" he asked one final time. Commander Ward remained silent for several seconds. Then he answered, 3,412. Shock spread across the hall immediately. The number was far smaller than General Vorthak's 12,000. Some delegates looked confused by the answer. They expected a legendary human warrior to have a much higher count. Commander Ward noticed their expressions. Then he spoke again. "I was only the weapons officer." The grand hall became completely silent, because everyone suddenly understood one terrifying fact. If the weapons officer alone had defeated 3,400 enemies, how many had the rest of humanity destroyed during the war? The grand hall remained silent after Commander Ward's answer. Even the sound of the hologram projector seemed loud in the empty room. General Vorthak slowly stepped back and looked toward the human officer. For the first time that day, the proud, craven warrior had no words to say. The human he had mocked only minutes earlier now stood before him as a survivor of history. Commander Ward looked around the chamber at the faces staring back at him. "You misunderstand humanity," he said quietly. "Our strength was never our kill count." Several delegates looked confused by the statement. After everything they had heard, they believed the human was speaking about military power. But Ward slowly shook his head. "The numbers do not matter," he continued. "What matters is why humans fight." The hologram above the hall changed one final time. Instead of warships and battlefields, the image showed human soldiers carrying injured civilians to safety. Some of those civilians were not human at all. They belonged to races from across the galaxy. During the Shadow War, many worlds had fallen too quickly to escape. Human fleets changed their missions and entered danger zones to rescue survivors. They protected alien colonies that humanity had never even visited before. Thousands of human soldiers never returned from those missions. Yet the rescue operations continued until the war finally ended. General Vorthak stared at the images in silence. "You fought for species that were not your allies?" he asked quietly. Commander Ward nodded once. "Children do not choose the wars of adults," he replied. The simple answer spread through the room like a wave. Many delegates lowered their eyes in silence. The human officer looked toward the stars beyond the glass ceiling. "Humans understand loss," he said softly. "That is why we fight so hard to stop others from feeling it." For thousands of years, humanity had lived through wars, disasters, and suffering. Instead of breaking them, those experiences had changed them. They had learned the value of peace because they understood the cost of war. General Vorthak slowly walked forward until he stood in front of Commander Ward. The great craven warrior lowered his head respectfully. "I judged your people too quickly," he said. "For that I apologize." The entire hall watched in silence as the strongest warrior in the room honored the human he had once mocked. Commander Ward gave a small nod and accepted the apology. He looked once more at the stars above the chamber before speaking his final words. "The galaxy fears humanity because of how many enemies we have defeated." He paused for a moment. "But the truth is far simpler than that." The room became completely silent. Humanity is dangerous because when innocent lives are threatened, we do not stop fighting, no matter the cost. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And from that day forward, the galaxy no longer remembered the humans' kill count. They remembered the reason behind it.